Hi, everyone. I'm running a couple of minutes late because I'm like super sick. So I'm really sorry. I'm confronted with like a really bad fall cold. I should have predicted this was going to happen because, like I haven't had fall for the last 6 years because we've been in California. So I'm like very under the weather for like, this is really like worse than the last 2 days actually. So slow moving, slow going this morning, but I'm really glad you're all here. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 24th of September, 2024. I'm ECM. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a black cashmere boat neck sweater. My hair is pulled back, my thick gold hoops are in, and I am in front of a oak cabinet and a stack of books, and I'm a pink skin, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman. I'm coming to you, as always, from Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican occupied land. Okay, so first things first. If you happen to miss the truly disgusting statements by Ohio Senate candidate Bernie Moreno overnight, because the story broke like late yesterday afternoon, I highly encourage you to go find the videotape, because essentially what Bernie Moreno did, and actually in a weird sort of way, I have to say I'm really glad for this moment, because we've talked a lot on this broadcast about how Sherrod Brown has been in the race for his life for this seat in Ohio. And Bernie Moreno showed his true colors last night. Not that there could really have been any surprise, because he's Trump endorsed and he's been a Trump sycophant for a very long time now. But at a campaign event, he stated that he thought it was, quote, a little crazy for women over 50 to care about abortion rights. And, essentially went on to say a number of truly patronizing and fundamentally degrading things to the laughter of people in the audience about why it is that he thinks women should just forget about abortion once our reproductive years are over. I have to say that I think this is a big FAFO moment for Bernie Moreno. Sherrod Brown's campaign is already out there talking about it and was last night. But I think part of what's been happening in Ohio is that there's been a bit of unfamiliarity on a statewide level, and actually very much so on a national level, about the threat that Bernie Moreno is to not just to the state of Ohio, but also to the Senate. He's another J.D. Vance. And the real question that, Ohio folks have to ask themselves right now is whether or not they want two J.D. Vances representing them in the Senate. I think the answer to that should be abundantly clear, but I also think this is a great moment for there to be a national discussion about the importance of Sherrod Brown's race, because the whole Senate could rise or fall on whether or not Sherrod Brown keeps his seat. And while I know there are some people who have been, for whatever reason, a little bit disappointed in Sherrod Brown in recent months, I'm just going to say this. We have to keep that seat. We have to keep that seat. It literally is one of those situations where, like, if we lose any Senate seat that is currently held by a Democrat and we do not make that seat up somewhere else, the entire Harris-Walz agenda will be dead in the water. And on top of it, even if we manage to elect Harris-Walz, we're going to have a situation where we're not going to be able to get judges passed through the confirmation process to restore some of the damage being done to our judiciary by Trump-appointed judges. All right? So it's a very, very big deal to make sure that we keep this seat. And I will just say this, I think everybody, regardless of where you live, regardless of whether or not you're in Ohio, should be amplifying this story right now, because one of the things that Sherrod Brown really needs right now is money. He needs donations so that he can actually go out and effectively combat what is essentially a Trump-funded campaign by Bernie Moreno to take over that Senate seat in Ohio. And I'm also just going to say one other thing here. There's a very obvious link between all the racist, xenophobic nonsense that is being thrown around about Springfield, Ohio, and the attempt to get Bernie Moreno more donations so that he can beat Sherrod Brown. These things are very clearly connected. So incredibly important right now to be very thoughtful about where you are directing your money in terms of Senate races. You all know that I've been talking for quite some time about the importance of this race in particular, among others. All right. And I want everybody to be very aware that this is a seat that has been in a really precarious position for like the last 6 months. You can go to the Cook Report and find out which ones are currently real toss-ups. And Sherrod Brown has been in the toss-up column for an extremely long time. So very important to be thoughtful about this. Okay, for the folks in the comments who are asking about down ballot money, I need to explain something to you, all right? Because there is a tone to the way that these questions get posed to me that sounds like it's somehow blaming Kamala Harris for her incredible fundraising. Okay, you need to understand something about the way the fundraising works. Not all the fundraising that is allegedly being raised by, not allegedly, that is being raised by Kamala Harris is going directly to the Harris campaign. A whole chunk of it is going to the DNC. And the DNC decides where that money is going to be allocated. While it is true that the Harris-Walz campaign has said that they are allocating an enormous amount of money, $50 million the last time I heard, to down ballot races, which is incredible because they are so well funded. If you want to control where your money is going, your only option is to donate directly to the candidate themselves. And I don't want anybody on this feed to be like blaming Kamala Harris for using the money that she justifiably needs to use to win in this election because it's not flowing where you think it should go. If you think that money should be going to Sherrod Brown, you should donate to Sherrod Brown. Okay? And I just have to say this, like, you know, the DNC has a lot of money to work with right now. And we're way better off than we have been in prior election cycles. And also, there has historically, in every election in my lifetime, been an enormous amount of criticism about how the DNC decides to allocate that money, right? We had whole debates in 2020 and in past election cycles about like money being routed to white male candidates that weren't doing very well versus, let's just say, Val Deming's Senate race in Florida, okay? There's been whole discussions about this in every single election cycle, both midterms and presidential years. So you need to make donations to the candidates that you care about rather than blaming the Harris-Walz campaign for trying to beat Donald Trump. Okay. I truly think that like everybody should only be donating directly to candidates' websites where you want your money to go. Okay. That's like the answer to all of this. So don't blame someone who is trying to defeat the most significant fascist threat of our lifetimes for using that money to accomplish that aim, okay? And also allocating $50 million to down ballot candidates, which she did not have to do, all right? Let's talk for a couple of moments about what's happening in Florida, speaking of Harris-Walz, because one of the things, I've been saying to you all now for at least the last like 3 or 4 months that Florida is in play. Florida is in play, all right? And one of the things that the Harris-Walz campaign is able to do with the amazing fundraising that they've been able to do is to expand the ground game in places where you might think they didn't have that much of a foothold. So I want you all to understand the Harris-Walz campaign is opening a second campaign office in Jacksonville. Duval County is getting additional campaign funds. They're getting additional ground game people. There is expansion happening all over Florida right now for the Harris-Walz campaign. Why? Because Florida can flip. And I'm just going to tell you all, I know I talked about this yesterday, but I'm going to tell you all as well. There is significant movement in Texas that we have learned about in the last 24 hours. Additional ground support for the true work of boots on the ground in Texas to campaign for Harris-Walz. I told you guys yesterday, I'm not counting on it, but we're within striking distance of Texas. And I would very much like to help you all understand that one of the things that's really significant about the way in which this fundraising is being allocated is that we may be able to flip what have historically been deep red states, or at least deep red states for let's just say the last 16 years. Let's call it the last 4 presidential cycles. We may be able to do that because of the fundraising that Harris-Walz has done and their significant commitment of resources to those states. And let me say one other thing. This is significant not just for the presidential race. I have to remind you all of this because there is a coattails effect, right? You start getting people invested in voting for Harris-Walz, you start to see significant shifts in how people vote for down ballot candidates. So please, please, please make certain that you look at how the funds that you are contributing are being allocated, of course, but also at the significant inroads that are being made in places that were literally written off as recently as like 3 months ago. All right. So very significant to think about this in the current election cycle and also in the long game. Because I'm just going to tell you guys one other thing. On the Dems Abroad call that I was in the green room with Beto O'Rourke and Ruben Gallego. And I'll just tell you, powered by people Beto O'Rourke's organization is continuing to do just like insane voter mobilization in Texas, including on college campuses. And there is a long game in Texas that should not be ignored. And, one of the things that I have to remind everybody of here is that, I've said to everyone repeatedly that the way in which Georgia flipped blue, like I haven't just said this is just facts. The way in which Georgia flipped blue and that we ended up with Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock is by a very long game being played by Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight Georgia to make sure that there was an understanding of which areas needed to flip to be able to flip the whole state. And the mobilization was incredibly targeted and thoughtful for 6 years before that was accomplished. So no one should be writing this off, right? Colin Allred is now, as I said yesterday, for the first time ever polling ahead of Ted Cruz. We have to keep our foot on the gas for that campaign. Debbie, God, I'm sick. Sorry, you guys. Debbie Mukasey Powell in Florida is within striking distance of Rick Scott, okay? All of these things are connected. And so, eyes on the prize and donate to the candidates that you care about, and also recognize that Harris Walls is doing incredible work with its ground game in places that historically would not have gotten this kind of attention because of the funding that they have. All right. It's really good stuff. All right. Okay. Somebody asked a question about, like down ballot races, speaking of which, and, people only voting for the top of the ticket. I have to remind you all here that you have resources available to you where you live to help educate people about who to vote for down the ballot. All right. You should be looking at voter guides that are put out by your local Democratic Party. You should be looking for voter guides put out by voter mobilization organizations where you live. You can always go to Ballotpedia and do your own research for candidates that are down ballot. But someone on the Patreon feed this morning was like, how do we counter this? Well, the way that you counter this is by everything that I've been recommending here for like literally the last 3-4 years. It's to get involved where you live with local and state level mobilization. Do not just campaign or canvass for the top of the ticket. Get invested and involved in local races. Make sure that you understand particularly who is running for sheriff, who is responsible for the administration of your local and state elections, who is being elected to your city council, your county council, who is being elected as the mayor of your town. These are things that directly impact all sorts of issues that bubble up to the national level, right? And you've of course got to care about who's getting elected for your House seat, who's running from your state for senator. All of these things are incredibly important. But you have an obligation not just to educate yourselves, but to educate your neighbors and your friends about all this stuff. And you can do this without you should be volunteering, but you can do this even without volunteering for like a local campaign. You can simply print out voter guides from like your local Democratic Party and hand them out to your neighbors, right? Like there are all sorts of ways to do this to educate people where you live. And it's on all of us who care about this to make sure that our neighbors understand how they should vote. I'm just going to mention, by the way, as well, there are like shenanigans afoot in early voting already where Republican activists, I hesitate to call them activists, let's just call them astroturfed actors, are piloting into certain jurisdictions in like Virginia and standing just outside the perimeter that they're allowed to be in for Virginia early voting sites and handing out Republican draft ballots filled out with who they want people to vote for. And then when people refuse to take them, they're screaming at them. Okay, there's all sorts of reasons why you should report those people to voter hotlines. But all this said, the more empowered people are to know who they are voting for before they fill out a ballot, the better off we're going to be. All right. So that kind of education is really important where you live. All right. And there are plenty of organizations that are already pulling together that information. Okay. People always ask me about judges because judges are nonpartisan in a lot of elections statewide. You have to do your research. I mean, that's the hardest part of my voting every single time is I go and I track down, where these judges have worked. I'm always predisposed to vote for public defenders instead of prosecutors. I'm always predisposed to vote for people who are not endorsed by the FOP rather than people who are. I'm always predisposed to vote for people who have been like consumer attorneys working on behalf of consumers or advocates for marginalized people than I am to vote for people who are like, pro law enforcement. And, you've got to be very thoughtful about how you go through that process. But you should know who you are voting for every elected office before you walk in the door. Okay. And that's the work of getting prepared to vote. All right. I know it's a lot easier when you're doing mail-in voting, but that's not available to everybody. In California, it would take me like an hour to fill out my ballot every single time. So in some places, you do elect judges. In some states, you don't. All right. You've got to understand how it works where you live. In California, all the state judges are elected. All right. So again, this is a part about educating yourselves about who is running where you live and being prepared to vote. And voting blue up and down the ballot is not necessarily enough, because I'm going to warn you, there are people in many jurisdictions, including places like West Virginia, who are running as Democrats who used to be Republicans. All right. You have to be very well informed of what you are voting for when you vote. All right. Okay. Biden gave, and may still be in the process of giving, he was when I was going on the air, an incredible speech in front of the UN. This will be his last speech as the president of the United States in front of the United Nations. I have to say that I was very impressed with this speech. There are other people who have already come out. There a lot of what appears to be bot traffic is already circulating on all of this. But he made some very profound and significant statements about the need for a two-state solution for Gaza and Israel, an end to the bombing of Gaza. He also gave some very significant statements, as far as I know, some of the most significant statements he's ever given about what's happening in Sudan. And as well, talked about the importance of supporting Ukraine, talked about the importance of NATO and the United Nations, talked about Finland and Sweden joining the coalition and the importance of that admission and getting Ukraine to a place where it could also be in a similar position. He talked about the ending the rising tide of right-wing hate worldwide, the importance of restoring the United States' reputation on the national stage. Very significant speech, very well presented. Again, also just a critical moment. He spent a lot of time in the speech talking about leadership and the importance of leadership on the national stage and the responsibility of leadership internationally, and the critical importance of standing for democracy. So I would encourage people to go seek that out, because honestly, really good speech, in my opinion, very well formed, very strong statements, some of which go further than what we've heard before. And I feel, I don't know, very good about it. Very good about it. I feel like, we haven't seen much of Biden in news coverage lately, although he's been doing a fantastic job because of everybody covering, Harris Walls and also, the looming presidential election. But Biden's still out there doing the thing. And I'm very grateful to kind of see him out there doing that. All right. I have to warn you all, the vice presidential debate is a week from today, for those who are not aware. We already know that Walls is in prep, and that Pete Buttigieg is playing JD Vance in the prep. Which I'm thrilled about. I honestly think that you kind of couldn't pick a better character to be playing JD Vance than Pete Buttigieg. I'm just going to tell you all that I expect this debate to be very heated. And while I think that it's going to be an enormous exercise in gaslighting and hate and rage from JD Vance, I do think there's going to be a lot of things slung around about Walls's service in the National Guard. They're going to try to slight his title. There's going to be kind of efforts to undercut his progressive positions and policies. And some of those will probably be very vicious. But we need to make sure that, we understand going into it that it's going to be that JD Vance is going to pull out all the nonsense. And, I think unlike Trump in the last debate, Vance is going to be way more controlled and therefore a far more effective fascist. So I just want everybody to be prepped. Okay, that it's going to be a very intense event. I still think that Tim Walz is absolutely going to wipe the floor with JD Vance, but I also think that Vance is going to be perhaps the most vicious that we have ever seen him. And my hackles are up about what the event is going to be like. So I kind of want to just wait for everyone, warn everyone rather, to prepare yourselves. And we're going to hear a lot more about debate prep in the coming days. But, please please be aware that, that's coming up. And I don't know, buckle up, I guess, as I want to often say. Okay. Somebody on the Patreon feed this morning, reminder, if you want to ask me questions, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistance live. It helps to fund this work, pay my team. And if this broadcast is helpful to you, please consider it like, your average donation to public television or NPR or something like that. Subscription started as little as $5 a month, and it helps to keep me on the air 6 days a week. Okay. And you get all sorts of perks if you join. I was asked by a Patreon subscriber to talk again, as I did yesterday, about this issue of why women would vote for Trump. And I talked about it at length yesterday, and I'm not going to repeat what I said yesterday. You can go back and watch the broadcast. But I do want to point out that, in the context of some news right now about Beltway media, and particularly Olivia Newsy's alleged digital online affair with RFK Jr. while she was engaged to Ryan Lizza, who is 20 years her senior and also was fired from the New Yorker for sexual harassment. It has now come out this morning that Keith Olbermann had an affair with Newsy when she was 21 and he was 55. And this has brought out like a whole swath of women, unfortunately, on my feed who are, very invested in, I don't know how to put it, the internalized misogyny play out of Olivia Newsy allegedly having daddy issues. And, there's a lot of like insinuated sleeping her way to the top stuff here. And I don't want to defend Olivia Newsy because I think she's profoundly corrupt. And honestly, I think she's done an enormous degree of harm to women in journalism and to journalism generally. She's also incendiarily racist and, has a long history of, fangirling Ann Coulter and all sorts of other nonsense that should have flagged her years ago. All right. I don't like defending people like this, but also I have to point out that when you are not looking at the totality of the dynamics in play here, like the fact that she was brought into a newsroom as a teenage college student and very clearly, I'm just going to say it was preyed upon by significantly older male journalists. If you're not seeing that as a part of the dynamic that plays into this, you're missing something, because it can be all at once, right? It can be that she is profoundly corrupt and that she engaged in egregious breaches of journalistic ethics that have set back women in her profession. All right. It can also be the case that she's deeply troubled. It can also be the case that she was exploited. And all of those things can be true at once and be of intersecting responsibility. But anybody who's walking around claiming that it's totally normal or it's just men being men for like a 55-year-old journalist to be sleeping with a 21-year-old barely able to drink young woman in the profession and then be saying, oh, it was wholesome and she helped me get a dog, which is like what Keith Olbermann's statement is this morning. If you're looking at that and not seeing the problem in that power dynamic, you have work to do. And so I have to remind you all that, like, we all have been raised in white supremacist patriarchy. And I've said this so many times on this broadcast, but we all have so much unlearning to do, right? There are ways in which we have to look at the totality of the circumstances and with an understanding that, whatever is going on with Olivia Newsy, there are very clear indications here that older men in the profession, we're not playing on the level. All right. Like that's the nicest way I can say it. All right. And that this has been the story of her professional career. Okay. And I know there are people who are going to come on here and be like, don't take away Olivia Newsy's agency. Well, I can do both. Right. I can hold accountable senior, powerful male journalists for taking advantage of and her story is very unusual for those who don't know it. I mean, like, she ascended into very significant media newsrooms at an extremely young age, like 17. Okay. Her story is very unusual, and it's very clear that there are intersecting dynamics at play here. All right. And I don't think any of these men should be let off the hook. I don't think anybody should be using terminology like daddy issues or sugar daddies or anything else in relation to this, while also holding her accountable for her own behavior. All right. Both are true at once. And I will just say this. The same reason that women are able to blame, right? Olivia Newsy for, allegedly having daddy issues and thereby excusing predatory behavior. That's the same dynamic that allows women to vote for Trump. It's all on the same spectrum, right? Because if you're not willing to look at the lens at which patriarchy has indoctrinated you, and you're not willing to unlearn your own internalized sexism, you fall prey to these narratives. And therefore you become an enforcer of patriarchy against other women. It's a very cyclical dynamic. Again, I don't need to self-promote, but my book, Becoming Heroines, which came out in 2021, has a whole section on this, on how we all have to unlearn our own internalized misogyny so we don't become enforcers of patriarchy against other women. White women need this in particular. So I will just say this, okay? I think that the dynamics of this situation are emblematic of power plays in so many professions. I think that media and legacy media in particular is having its own come to Jesus moment in so many ways, whether that's about corruption, whether it's about how they're covering Trump, whether it's about having the same dynamics that tore apart Hollywood in the Me Too movement, right? All of this is coming to pass at once, and it's not an accident. All right. Like, accountability is needed everywhere. And I want people to, and I'm just going to say this, like, again, I get really angry about these kind of comments, saying things like not every woman is a victim in every instance of this. I need people to kind of grasp something. All right. You can be someone, okay, who is, for whatever reason, not the most ethical person. And that does not mean that you have not been preyed upon. Okay. And in fact, one of the reasons why you may end up not being the most ethical person may be because you've been preyed upon since you were a teenager. All right. Like, you have to be willing to see the totality of these dynamics. And one of the things that I think is really, really dangerous here is the immediate jump to say that because she was engaged in whatever relationships, let's just be generous about it, with men who are decades older than her, sometimes more than twice her age, that somehow that is necessarily her agency or her fault. All right. Like, we have to be willing to see that both or many things can be true at once, and that patriarchy and misogyny inflects every aspect of our culture. Okay. If you're not willing to accept that point, by the way, I'm not really sure why you're here watching me. Like, I kind of have a moment where I'm like, you don't really know who you're tuning into. But the reality of this is that we have to look at the fact that these kind of power dynamics are at play in every aspect of our culture, every aspect of it, right? It's in play in the conversations that we've had here on this broadcast over the last few months about like why it is that white male commentators on YouTube have followings of millions of people and women and marginalized people don't. Patriarchy, right? White supremacy, because lots of people without doing their own work just simply gravitate toward white men as greater authorities, right? We've seen the way that this is played out in the context of the breaking news about Puff Diddy, right? That like he got away with this for like literally decades because Black women were predominantly his victims. And we downplay the victimization of Black women in every aspect of our culture, right? We can see how this played out in the context of Harvey Weinstein. The way in which, the fact that he was preying upon young women actresses who had no voice and had no power was dismissed as just part of the Hollywood game, also for decades. Jeffrey Epstein, don't get me started, right? And if you don't see that same dynamic in play in lesser or greater ways in every aspect of American culture, in every industry, in every corporate environment, you are missing part of the story. Full stop. Full stop. Okay? Because it is part of the story everywhere. And, I'll just say one other thing that I find just like so offensive about this. We're watching these tropes play out in relation to Kamala Harris, right? Somebody contacted me the other day through DMs and said, my mom wrote to me and said that Kamala Harris had slept her way to the top, right? Because she had dated Willie Brown when he was the mayor of San Francisco. Okay. If you don't want Kamala Harris to be tagged with that kind of lingo, you should not be tagging other women with that kind of lingo, right? You have to understand how all these things feed together, and you've got to be willing to unlearn the lessons you've been taught. So, again, do some thinking about it. All right. And, I'll just say one other thing here. We have not even begun the conversation about how broken and emotionally immature and psychologically damaged the men are who do this. because that conversation is one that I don't think we're prepared to have yet as a culture. I hope we are, right? But I know like one podcast that's willing to have that conversation. One. And, everybody else is focused on like, what did she do? Did she sleep her way to the top? Does she have daddy issues? Is she looking for a sugar daddy? How did she play on these men to ascend in her career? Did she get favor? Right? Nobody's talking about how like truly messed up you have to be a 55-year-old man sleeping with a 21-year-old woman. Dear Lord. All right. I'm going to leave that there because I feel like I could rant about this all day. I want everybody to be just thoughtful, right, about how all these dynamics play together. Because one of the things that is going to be so desperately necessary, assuming that we elect Harris Walz, is that we're going to start to have discussions about how we got to this nightmarish place in American culture to begin with. And this is part of it. It's by people being unwilling to be self-reflective about all the disgusting lessons that we've been taught by white supremacist patriarchy and capitalism and other isms, right? That we just like take for granted, that we never investigate in our own thinking and our own responses, right? That allow us to become people who think we're entitled to sit in judgment, right? Of other marginalized people, of other women, because we've been taught to be enforcers of the systems that hold us down also, right? Those conversations need to happen. All right. All right. That's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow. I'm really sick. Sorry, you guys. I didn't expect to come on here and talk like this, but I've been thinking about this entire situation this morning and I've been really like up in arms about it. Anybody who has been preyed upon as a young woman by a significantly older man knows exactly what I'm talking about. Because I'll just say one other thing. It's very easy when you're in that situation to say like, well, I'm choosing this, right? Even though in the aftermath of it, you recognize all the power dynamics that were leveraged against you, and there are so many circumstances I could point to in this way, but like, we really have to be thoughtful and nuanced about the way that we talk about it. All right, everybody. I will catch you all here tomorrow at the absolute latest. Lots of interesting stuff going on today. And I'm sure we're not going to get through another day without like more disgusting commentary from the Trump Vance campaign, but sit tight. And in the meantime, go donate to Sherrod Brown. Please amplify what's going on with Bernie Moreno. And let's make sure we get Sherrod Brown reelected to the Senate and that we hold the Senate. And please support Angela Alsobrooks and Debbie Murkowski-Powell and Colin Allred and John Tester and Elise Slotkin and everybody else who like needs our support. All right. So that we hold the Senate. All right, everybody. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.